Hi Year 6, it's Mrs. Withers here with chapter 23 of Orphans of the Tide, and this chapter is called Finn. They spent the rest of the day planning their escape from the city. Anna took Fry and Invert down to the docks, searching for a suitable boat to acquire, and using Ellie's small allowance to buy enough dried fruits and smoked fish to last a month at sea. All Ellie could do, meanwhile, was lie in an exhausted heap in the workshop. At times her body felt like it was made from rock and iron. At other times it was made from nothing at all. She awoke that night, painfully thirsty. Her heart was thudding like she'd just sprinted up a hill. She groaned in irritation at her own body. How could she be so awake, in the middle of the night when she had spent the half day asleep? She pulled a blanket around her shoulders and staggered into the workshop to get some water. "Hello, sister." Finn sat cross-legged and barefoot by the front door, beneath the stuffed sunfish. He wore a white shirt and white trousers, and his hair shone silver in the moonlight. He looked like an angel's wingless child. Ellie hobbled over to the sink, ignoring him. She turned on the tap, sipped water from her cupped hands, and then dried them on her hair. Long strands fell away between her fingers. They too shone silver. Ellie gasped in shock and went to check herself in the mirror. She felt a stab of fear. Her hair was noticeably thinner. She thought she could see the paleness of her scalp underneath. "How are you doing this?" she moaned. Finn crawled over to her on all fours. She could smell him, somehow, sweet and clean, like freshly laundered clothes. He peered into the mirror, admiring their reflections. He was rosy-faced, with a new layer of puppy fat on his cheeks, his hair arranged in tight, gleaming ringlets. She was pallid, her body skinny and scratched. Beads of cold sweat traced her forehead. Finn smiled. "Oh, Nellie, you're not looking too good. Can I help you with anything?" "Shut up," she whispered. She didn't want to wake Seth by shouting. "Shut up," Finn repeated in a childish sing-song voice. "Is that all you can say these days? Gosh, you're really falling apart, aren't you, Nellie? That's so sad." Ellie put her hands on her forehead, avoiding her hair. What had she missed? How had he become more powerful, even though he'd never granted her a wish to save Hargraff? "Maybe, if you were kinder to me, I'd tell you," he said, staring glumly at his feet. "Talking to you never gets me anywhere." "Oh, so you're just going to ignore me again?" He nodded. "I suppose maybe I deserve it. Maybe I deserve it for dying." Ellie pushed past him, heading back to her bedroom. "But then," he continued, fiddling with one of the keys at his neck, "maybe I wouldn't have died if you'd have stayed with me like I asked." She turned, and Finn bit his lip, as if wondering whether he'd gone too far. "That's what happened, Nellie," he said, holding out his hands. "I'm not being mean. That's just what happened." "It wasn't my fault," said Ellie firmly. "Oh, Nellie, we both know that's a lie." Ellie clenched her fists, then took a deep breath and kept walking. "Don't go, Nellie. I want to talk to you. Don't leave me again." She ignored him. "Don't go," Finn repeated. This time it sounded like a command. The hairs on the back of Ellie's neck stood up. "What do you want?" she said. Finn pawed one foot at the ground. "Well, first, I think you should admit that you're the reason I'm dead." She swallowed. "No." Finn skipped across the workshop with a tinkle of metal. "Do you remember the way we used to go out in that little rowing boat together on those summer days when the waves were calm? We'd take a fishing rod and a net, and a telescope too, and spend the whole day not catching anything, and not caring either. We'd get all red and sunburnt and laugh at how rubbish we were at fishing, and play that board game we'd built together. And then, one time, I thought I saw a blue shark in the water, and I got so excited that I fell in, and you jumped in after me, and I nearly drowned, but you rescued me. And then You promised me you'd never let me get hurt. Remember that? Remember, you promised you'd never let me get hurt. Finn, what do you want? She whispered. I told you. Admit it's your fault. But why? Because then I can forgive you. Then you can stop beating yourself up all the time. Let's put this all behind us and get back to the way things were. Finn and Ellie having fun adventures at sea. She stared at him a long time, and he stared back, unblinking. He gave her a little smile. I shouldn't have left his side for so long, she said, but that's not why he died. I gave up hope, Nellie. Don't you see? It hurt too much. I needed you, I did. I hate you. Finn looked hurt. You hate your brother? No, I hate you. But You're not my brother, she said sternly. Your forgiveness means nothing. Finn turned his back on her. What did your brother look like, Nellie? What colour eyes did he have? A stab of panic. Ellie realised she didn't remember. She clutched the blanket tighter around her shoulders. Green, like mine, she said uncertainly. Finn shook his head. Oh, Nellie, he spun back around on his heels, staring at her with bright blue eyes. Your brother's eyes were blue. Stop that, she hissed. What? This is what he looked like. Trust me. No. And remember the way he left his ear crinkled? Finn said, pointing eagerly at the rumpled fold at the top of his ear, poking out between his curls. His ear didn't do that. Finn frowned. Are you sure? Yes, she said adamantly, though she wasn't sure at all. Finn laughed, a warm, childish music. He laughed like that, though, didn't he? Didn't he, Nellie? You see, you're better off with me. I'm the only Finn you need. And he skipped forward eagerly and tried to hug her. Get off me! She shoved him hard. There was a jangling of metal, and Finn gave a small "oh" and fell backwards. His skull smacked against the sharp corner of the workbench. Ellie gasped. Finn! I'm... Finn grunted and hauled himself up on his elbows. His head drooped, his eyes half shut. A dark patch blossomed on the top of his head. Thick red drops patterned on the floorboards, dripping from the curls of his fringe. What were you about to say? He whispered. Were you going to say sorry? No, Ellie lied. Are you going to make it better then? Will you stop the pain this time? Ellie shook her head, sinking to her knees. The skin on her scalp itched as if she could feel an echo of Finn's injury. She scratched it, and more hair came away in her hands. I tried everything to save you. All I needed was you there with me. I was so cold, Nellie, so cold. I just needed you. He crawled towards her. You can't know that, she whispered. You weren't there. I'm everywhere, Nellie. I thought I could save him. You're not Mum, Ellie. I know you try to be. You try so hard, but you're not. I thought that I could save you. That you'd prove you were as clever as Mum. No, Ellie whispered, tasting tears in her mouth. I just wanted him to live. Then why did you leave me? Finn said. He took her hand, smearing blood on her knuckles. Do you remember, Nellie? Do you remember promising to keep me safe? No. She couldn't remember. She couldn't remember any of it. Not her brother, not his laugh, nor their days out fishing in their little boat, not the colour of his eyes. All she had was this boy in front of her. Nellie, please, you can have me back. You can have me back forever. But first, you owe me an apology. I don't owe you anything, Ellie whispered. But she couldn't be sure of that either. A terrible pain stung her chest, an agonising cold that filled up the brittle, empty shell of her body. She was so tired of suffering. She wanted it gone. I can help you, Nellie. I can forgive you. I'm your brother. Don't you want my forgiveness? Ellie sobbed, and with it came a sudden relief. Yes, she said, and just saying the word made her feel better. Yes. Finn stared adoringly into her eyes. He pressed his forehead to hers, and she cradled him in her arms, her dear loving little brother. I'm sorry, Finn, she said, crying at the words spilled out. I'm sorry. I wasn't there for you. I'm sorry I left you alone. I thought I could cure you. It was selfish. So selfish. I should have stayed with you and kept you safe. I should have been at your side. She trembled, holding him there in the pool of moonlight. She smiled, moving a curl of hair from his face, admiring his rosy cheeks. She felt his head and found it was mended. The bleeding had stopped. Ellie laughed. He stared back at her encouragingly, and she thought how sweet it would have been once he'd forgiven her. How she would be able to picture the two of them again in their little boat, her with a net and a telescope, and him with his golden hair and his slightly crumpled left ear and his brilliant blue eyes. I forgive you, Nellie, said Finn. Ellie let a great warmth sweep across her chest, a joy unlike anything she could ever remember knowing. She laughed and laughed, and tears fell down her cheeks. She held Finn close and stroked his hair, her body untethered, floating up and up towards the great warming sunlight. Thank you, she said, squeezing him tightly. But as she said the words, she noticed Finn's body felt lighter. She wiped her eyes. Finn? She turned his face towards her, but it was still and lifeless. His body was dissolving, flaking away like ash from a fire. She tried to catch it in her hands, but her fingers passed straight through it. Finn! Finn! Ellie cried, trying to hold on to him. But before there was nothing to hold. His body had no substance any more. Wisps of him curled through the air. And then he was gone. Completely. From the diary of Claude Hestermeyer. I think it is nearly the end. I've been a fool. I let it get the better of me. Now my body is at its weakest, little more than a paper shell. I can feel a terrible pressure inside my chest, something yearning to be born. I can barely hold my pen. I'm going to let myself be captured by the Inquisition. There is a clock tower near the great docks where Peter and I shared many glorious evenings, talking long into the night. I shall go there and try to remember him, and then call out until they come and take me. But first I will deliver this diary to the university. If I can ensure it is read by others, then perhaps my suffering will not have been in vain. It is my dearest hope that my story will help future vessels, that it will teach them things I wish I had known from the beginning. Maybe it will even help them to destroy the enemy for good. The enemy mocks me as I write these words. Give them your book, it says, but I will hurt them all the same. My life has been too brief and too full of darkness, but for those wondrous years I was lucky enough to know a soul as golden as kind as Peter. I wish I could remember him now. All I have is the enemy. But I believe one day this foul God will overreach itself, that it will step into the mind of someone stronger than me, one who can construct a shield from their love, or even a weapon, and on that day the enemy will know such terrible suffering. So I say this to you, dear vessel, my inheritor, I have faith in you. And that's it for today. We'll carry on the story when we're back in school next week.